Meine Damen und Herren, liebe Studierende, liebe Gäste, ich begrüße Sie zu den beiden letzten Mosse-Lectures in diesem Semester zum Thema Europa im Blick der anderen. Heute Abend und morgen Abend mit den Vorträgen von William Kentridge und Andreas Hüssen. Mein Name ist Klaus Scherpe. When Gayatri Spivak gave her Mosse lecture in December in this auditorium, she made some critical remarks on our topic, Europe and its others. Or should it rather be Europe as an other? Both phrasings seem to expose again and once more how Europe had consolidated itself as sovereign subject by defining its colonies as the others. But I must say none of our speakers, of course, would have confirmed this assumption. And what we will hear today and tomorrow, I'm sure, will draw a completely different picture and will give us ample opportunities to revise such beliefs and prejudices. To welcome William Kentridge in Berlin tonight in the Mosse Lecture series just makes me happy and proud and grateful that he accepted our invitation on his way through Europe, coming from Hamburg, where he gave his lecture performance of the drawing lessons at the Deutsches Schauspielhaus. All credit to make this possible belongs to Andreas Hüssen, professor of German and comparative literature at Columbia University in New York, who has done himself some marvelous work on Kentridge and will now introduce him to you. Mir bleibt noch der Hinweis auf die morgige Veranstaltung mit Andreas Hüssen, den wir dann ausführlich vorstellen werden. Er spricht in deutscher Sprache unter dem Titel Europäische Moderne im Blick über die Kunst von Kentridge im Vergleich zu der indischen Künstlerin Nalini Malani in Bild und Text. Dieser Vortrag, zu dem ich Sie herzlich einladen möchte als Fortsetzung des heutigen Abends, findet statt schräg gegenüber von hier im Hörsaal 1001, Dorotheenstraße 24, auch um 19 Uhr CT. Wir werden das ausschildern. So Andreas Hüssen will do the substantial introduction now. Andreas, it's all yours.
Meine Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen zum heutigen Abend, zu dem Vortrag von William Kentridge, History and the Image. It is an honor and truly a great pleasure to introduce African artist William Kentridge, whom we may count as one of the most extraordinary artists of our time. With drawing as the point of departure and anchor of his artistic practice, Kentridge has worked in animation, sculpture, installation, performance, theater, opera, and the making of books. And more often than not, he has worked with a host of collaborators, composers, musicians, puppeteers, even with a historian of science. But rather than rendering the boundaries between different media and practices meaningless, his work always insists on making us aware of the thresholds between media, between image and language, sound and image, the heard and the printed word, and so forth. Issues of temporality and spacing are crucial to his practice, no matter what the medium may be. His studio in Johannesburg, so central to many of his lectures, is not a place of refuge from the world, a place of inwardness, but a laboratory of ways of seeing and exploring the very emergence of images in the world and our role in constructing them. Tonight, he will address the vexed relationship of image and history via his recent work on Schuberts' Winterreise. From early on, his work has revolved around what he has called the rock of apartheid, always aware that the sheer weight of that rock was inimical to the task of aesthetic representation. But rather than indulge in theories of unrepresentability once so prominent in aesthetic debates about trauma and the memory of the Holocaust. He does represent, tell stories, create powerful figures in his drawings for projection, open up the gaps and fissures of the seen and the unseen, trying to coax his viewers out of the disavowal of the past and into an active engagement with shadows and mnemonic uncertainty. His work explores how our imaginaries are constructed in a fluid and tension-filled encounter of the world with structures of oral, visual, and tactile perception. In its robust engagement with biography and a traumatic South African history placed within the trajectory of European colonialism, his work is political through and through, not in the sense of a message or mimetic depictions of historical events, but in the deeper sense of creating an ever-changing landscape of images from and within the landscape of apartheid and post-apartheid. Indeed, the issue of colonialism is front and center in his endeavor, from one of his first drawings for projection, entitled Felix in Exile, which first blew me away at the Documenta 10 in 1997, all the way to the most recent monumental installation, The Refusal of Time, shown at Documenta 13 in 2012 and now installed in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. We may recall here that African masks were a key moment in the emergence of European modernism. Think Picasso. But the colony did not figure then. In tonight's lecture, I trust Kentridge will work in reverse, looking at European music, Schubert's Winterreise, from an outside perspective. The lecture will address history and the image as the title promises. As I understand it, it is one of 3 lectures, the others dealing respectively with the relation of the image to sound and the image to text. I trust that today's lecture will again be focusing on what happens in the studio, where the exploration of image making and of historical imaginaries is at stake. In all of Kentridge's drawing, and let us understand this literally, in all his work drawing on European source materials, Büchner's Wojciech, Jary's Uburois, even Mozart's Zauberflöte, colonial history remains inscribed visually and conceptually in this work of cultural metamorphosis. Today it will be the late Schubert's Winterreise, that famous Liederzyklus, which is pervaded by intimations of death, melancholy, and longing, composed in a period of political censorship and repression. Now it is a real boon to have one William Kentridge to share with us some of his most recent work that deals, as all his earlier work, with the transnational appropriation of European art from a post-colonial outside, raising key questions about the role of medium and history for contemporary artistic production. To put it differently, at stake in much of Kentridge's work, here and elsewhere, are specific forms of a spectacular Entgrenzung of Western modernism and its central notion of the medium in image, language, and sound. Europe in post-colonial eyes, looking in from an outside, is of course increasingly accompanied today by the European gaze on the history of its colonizing ventures. William Kentridge's looking in from the outside is always inevitably takes account of South African history, thus creating that complex mirroring of African and European histories that pervades his art. Please welcome with me William Kentridge.